Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more book and music, mostly Taylor Swift related content. Today I have a reading wrap up for you guys of every book I read during the months of April and May. I didn't do one for April because I barely read anything during the month of April. I was still trying to get back in the swing of things after the war started, but this month was much more productive, so I'm just going to add April onto this month. The first book I'm going to be talking about is actually sponsored, so thank you so much to Katie Van Brunt for sending me your new book, My Life is a Clone. I also thank you for your support for Ukraine as seen in your link tree. My family and I appreciate that so much. So I read this book during May. It was a very quick page turner that I ended up reading in only just a few days. So the book presents itself as a sci-fi story about a girl named Willa who is a clone. She does not have many memories, but she does know that she was created to replace this family's late daughter Reese, who died in some sort of tragic way, but Willa doesn't know how she died. The reason she believes she does not have many memories is because she thinks that they were not downloaded into her brain correctly while they were programming her to be an adequate replacement for Reese. Early on in the book, we see that Willa has a psychiatrist who has actually diagnosed her with amnesia. She also has a pet dog, Rin, who she can talk to, but very early on in the book, we start to see clues that no one else around her can actually see Rin. So right off the bat, the protagonist seems a bit unreliable. So as the reader, you start making clues as to what is really going on. Van Brunt leaves just the right amount of clues that you keep trying to put pieces together, but nothing at all is easy to predict. The ending was so well done and unexpected that that's what really made it 4 out of 5 stars for me. The story is incredibly plot driven, and I think this would be a great book to get you out of a reading slump just over a weekend. This book is great for dog lovers because Rin is an absolutely adorable character. And there's also a bit of a side plot that involves Willa volunteering at a local veterinary clinic while she is attending high school. She believes her purpose as a clone is to help animals. The only thing that took me out of the story occasionally was the way some of the dialogue was written. I think the author is trying to avoid having any expletives in the text, so the teenage characters are not just saying words like crap, but things like craposaurus. I think just using words like crap or freaking or dang would be just fine and flow a lot more naturally. Other than that, this book handles the stigma that surrounds mental health and slut shaming that still goes on in high schools to this day in a very accurate way. The blurb says nothing about this, so I was pleasantly surprised by this content, and there is a bit of a romance in this story with kind of a love triangle trope, but it's not super central to the story. It's more just for some character development. Overall, if you love a good action-packed plot with great pacing, I highly advise you pick up this book. I will have links down in the description to his website and also where you can purchase the book. Okay, so now let's get into the very first book I read in April, so right after my last wrap-up ended. So I continue to try to get through the entire Warrior Cat series. I do sometimes really enjoy middle grade, and I really liked the very first 6 books in this series. It's just an incredibly long series and I have to take breaks, but I am very dedicated to finishing series. I am now on to all of the super editions. Since they are longer versions of these stories, sometimes they take off in a really slow way. Like the entire initial setup of Bluestar's prophecy is just very slow, but then it got really fast in the end. So this book is supposed to describe Bluestar's life events, like from the time she is born to her death. I thought this was going to be incredibly interesting because like you have to only use the good parts from someone's life if you're going to write just one book about everything that happens. There were a lot of really sad events. This character did not have it easy. Like I said, the beginning was a little bit slow, but I think it was better than Firestar's Quest. It just had a way more interesting premise. I don't really like the novels in this series that have a lot of journeying scenes. Those just tend to be really slow and not a whole lot going on. So there were a lot of plot points in this one that it was hitting, which I enjoyed. I think I maybe give this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. It had an interesting plot, concepts, and timeline, but it dragged just a little too much in the beginning. Okay, next I read Where the Crawdads Sing, which I actually did a reading vlog over. You can go watch that. I'll link it in the eye. I have a lot of thoughts about this one. First of all, I did read a library copy. For anyone concerned I'm putting money in a problematic author's pockets, this was such an interesting book. It had such beautiful writing and very beautiful poetry sprinkled in throughout the story. It painted Kaya, the main character, out as very mysterious to the reader because in some chapters she's kind of letting us in, but overall she is a very isolated character and she does remain isolated from the reader. It really shows us how to try to understand someone who grew up that isolated and someone who is that in tune with nature. There's a courtroom scene in this one. It's kind of all about the murder of Chase Andrews, who is another guy who lives in that town. This takes place in the 60s, and everybody just kind of blames the March girl, Kaya, because she's she's an outcast basically, and she is lower income. There's just a lot of prejudices going on, so they all kind of blame her for this guy's murder, and it shows us the events taking place way in the past when Kyle was a child all the way up to the actual murder happening, and it also flashes forward to the murder being discovered by the police. So there's a lot of time jumps happening in each chapter. I really like when books have like one chapter that's taking place during one time and then the next chapter takes place during another time, or switching point of views. That keeps me so intrigued and wanting to just keep reading more. If you want to see more of my thoughts on this book, you can go to the reading vlog, but I rated this 4 out of 5 stars. It had a very satisfying ending. A lot of people think it's heartbreaking. I found it more just like bittersweet. I definitely didn't cry at the ending or anything. This would be a 5-star if it was a heartbreaking ending, because that's usually the type of endings that my 5-star ratings are reserved for. So next I read Skyclan's Destiny. I went back to the Warrior series again. So this book returns to the perspective of the 5th clan of all the cats, which is Skyclan, and they've had a very tumultuous history. They haven't been able to exist as consistently as the other clans, so they've encountered a lot of problems. This book kind of details their journey to getting back into a fully functioning clan after Firestar kind of tries to guide them in the right direction before leaving to go back to his clan. There was a really interesting part in this one that I had never seen in the Warrior series before, where the cats are actually interacting with a human being, and she's like this child who is injured, and they decide they want to try to help her. And basically some of the cats think that they should not be involved in this, but other ones are thinking more with their heart than their head, I guess, and they really believe that they should be helping this little girl, which is so sweet. Oh my god, can you imagine being like an injured little girl and all these like cats come to comfort you? That actually happened to me when I was stepped on by a horse. I was sitting and bleeding on the lady's porch, and her cat came up and was like cuddling me. It was so sweet. Anyways, that was something that hadn't happened in the Warrior series up to this point, so it was really nice to get something new. A lot of tropes and plot points tend to repeat themselves in the series, but even with that, it still was just okay. I rated it 3 out of 5 stars. Next was when I actually read My Life as a Clone, which I already talked about. Okay, we are really jumping all over the place this month. So next I read House of Trump, House of Putin. This was recommended to me by one of my followers on TikTok. As some of you may know, I've been talking about Ukraine a lot and what my family is going through in that country, and this was an adventure. I gotta admit, a lot of the maybe first 80% of this book went kind of over my head because I have absolutely no experience learning about the Russian mafia. There was a lot of just proof, I guess, of all of the connections that Trump has in Russia, and that takes place for like the first 80%. Like, it very much reads kind of like a textbook. It's kind of dry, but then in the last few chapters, it's like a timeline of all the events happening up to the 2016 election, and sometimes it's down to the hour and like minute even, and it just shows all of the pieces falling into place for Putin's puppet in the Western world to be taking power. There was a lot of theorizing going on for me after I finished this book, especially after reading through some of the sources that this author used for this book, one of them being a New York Times article about how the physical polling places during the 2016 election dealt with Russian hacking just weeks before the election, and these were polling places in states that were swing states, and it was mostly in counties that were Democratic. So the day of the 2016 election, there were a bunch of people showing up and they were not able to vote because the computer was saying they already voted or they were at the wrong polling place. And it really made me wonder, the only way Putin might not have gotten Trump elected in 2020 was maybe due to all the mail-in voting that was happening. Because how can you prevent someone from voting at a physical polling place the day of if they are not going to a physical polling place the day of? This book leaves you with a lot to think about. It's concerning, it's disgusting. It also has a very concise list in the back of all 50-something connections that Trump has in Russia, with brief summaries of each one and kind of a description of each person and who they are to Trump. There is a lot of stuff about Ukraine in there as well, and how it affects our country, the United States, and just how much influence Putin has had in the Western world, mostly the United States, but also talks a little bit about Brexit and some of the things that have been going on in Western Europe. It's very interesting. I highly recommend it, especially the last few chapters, because those really expose things that directly affected our election's outcome. I think I rated 3 out of 5 stars, or maybe 4. It's just because the first 70 to 80% literally is like a textbook, and it's a little bit difficult to get through, especially if you don't know these mafia members, these mobsters that Trump is in contact with, that it talks about for the entire time. But it is very well researched. The sources are really diverse. I checked out a lot of them, so I definitely feel like more people should be reading this. Next, I read the Between Shades of Grey graphic novel. So I actually read this book, it's right here, for the first time when I was in middle school. This is the novel format. There is also now a graphic novel novel, which is what I read this last time. There's also a movie called Ashes in the Snow, which is incredible. I think everybody should consume this story as well in one form or another, whether it's the full-length novel, the graphic novel, or the movie. This is a historical fiction book about the death camps that Stalin was running during World War II and how that country never paid for what they did. It was essentially the exact same thing Germany was doing, but because they were on the winning side, there were never any trials. It's an incredible story that follows the main character, Lena, who is 15 years old. Her and her family are deported to Siberia from Lithuania. This was really happening in the Baltic states, I believe. It was also happening to Russian citizens, Ukrainians. There is a lot of anti-Ukrainian rhetoric in the movie, which is very accurate to some of the mindsets that are still happening in Russia. But in the book, the character that is getting all that anti-Ukrainian rhetoric is actually Polish, so they did change it up a little, and I'm glad they did because this book was published before 2014, and now it's really good that it's showing that mindset. But I mean, it was also happening against Polish people. Pretty much anyone who wasn't Russian, who was like communist or in the USSR and wasn't Russia. It was just absolutely awful. The more that you think about the Soviet Union as a whole, it's insane that they were able to rope that many countries into something against their will and deport the people of those countries into Siberia. So Lena and her family are deported to Siberia because her father did something that made him and his family enemies of the state. A huge and really beautiful part of the story is how much Lena loves to draw, and her mother and her brother end up at one concentration camp, and then her father ends up at a different one because he is a man and he is also the one who committed the crime. So he is in more of like a prison type camp. It's all prison. They all are serving prison sentences, even newborn babies. Basically, Lena's plan is to draw things on like handkerchiefs and things like that that she can pass around to people in the hopes that it will make it to her father's camp, because he can recognize her drawings just like she can recognize her favorite famous artist's drawings. He recognizes her hand. And so it's kind of her journey of trying to leave these kind of footprints for her father to find her. The graphic novel is just as beautiful as the full-length novel. I love the illustrations and it gave everything such a vivid picture. I love the colors that are used. This is 5 out of 5 stars, as is the full-length novel, as is the movie. So next, I read All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir, I think is her name. So this was actually a book featured in my Once Upon a Book Club book box. I am posting a vlog that is a reading vlog as well as kind of an unboxing of my Once Upon a Book Club book box. This is a beautiful young adult contemporary fiction novel about two Pakistani teenagers who are first-generation Americans, I think. They both come from immigrant families. So we have our main characters, Noor and Salahuddin. It's very much childhood best friends to lovers, but it's very innocent and cute and kind of slow burn. But this novel is about a lot of issues more so than their romance. It's just kind of how they are able to lean on each other, and their friendship is really put first, like their relationship to each other. And there is also a perspective in here from Salahuddin's mother, and it kind of goes back in time to before she left Pakistan and before she came to Juniper, California. And it's so sweet because Noor actually lives with her uncle since her entire family was killed in an earthquake in Pakistan. Her uncle came and saved her from the rubble and brought her to America. She ends up befriending Salahuddin, who has both of his parents, but pretty much Salahuddin's mother becomes kind of like a mother to Noor because she does not have one in her life, and their relationship is so precious. Noor is literally like a daughter to Salahuddin's mother. It's so sweet. There's a character death really early on in the book, which I kind of prefer it to be early on, because if it happened any later and I got way too attached to the character, not knowing what was going to happen, I would have been way more upset, and I'm just not in the right mindset to be devastated anymore right now. What I love so much about this book is that it creates empathy within the reader for these characters. It really puts it into perspective how people can land themselves in very difficult positions that a lot of people tend to look down on them for, because people really like to make assumptions and judge a book by its cover without knowing how someone maybe came to that position. It also really demonstrates the costs of the American dream, especially for people of color, lower income people, first generation Americans, and just how hard you have to fight to get out of your hometown and make something of yourself. This is a 4 out of 5 star book. The only qualm I have is with the pacing being a little all over the place. The way some of the scenes are written more for a poetic effect than realistic, I suppose. Like in the very beginning, the funeral scene was probably the best scene. There were the most heartbreaking quotes coming out of that one. But then kind of towards the end of the book, things seem to happen very quickly. I don't know if it was just because I was like turning pages so quickly, so entranced by this, or if it was just because it actually was a little bit rushed towards the end. Nonetheless, it was so well written. Oh my god, was so good. I highly recommend this for first generation Americans. I am not Pakistani or from anywhere close to that region, but there are some universal experiences of first generation American people. There's this awful white bitch in here who's so racist to them, and while I haven't experienced that, obviously, anyone who knew my mom was from Ukraine, people calling my mother a communist or making like mail order bride jokes, like there is a xenophobia, especially if you were in a place that does not have a lot of diversity. You'd think California would, but unfortunately there are a lot of people in high places who are just terrible. So I do think any first generation American, you need to read this. It's so good. I can't wait to post a reading vlog of this weekend, hopefully. And the last book I read in May, which I just finished last night, was Slipping on the Ice, which is a collection of stories from a Peace Corps Ukraine volunteer by Robert Minton. My mom found this book on Amazon. This is so cool, you guys. Oh my god, this reads like a conversation with a friend. It is so casual and funny and humorous and just very accessible to read, I guess. It's nothing flowery or complex. It's just this guy's experience doing Peace Corps in Ukraine, and he came to the country with no knowledge of Ukrainian or Russian, and he basically has to learn the language from the beginning. He is completely culture shocked. I really have a lot of comfort reading someone's first impression of Ukraine. It just brings me so much comfort to read what someone's first thoughts are entering the country, and I think this would also be really good for people who have never visited the country, who want to maybe visit one day, so it's going to be relatable to a lot of people who have never been. You just get to kind of grow with him and see exactly what he sees through his eyes. It also just represents Ukrainian people so well, and the culture and the mindset and the Ukrainian hospitality. He lives with a host family for the first 3 months, and it's this older couple who are in their 60s, and the woman is so dedicated to feeding him and feeding him well and making sure he does not get sick and teaching him how to do all these things that he's never had to do in America, making sure he does not get sick, always pestering him to wear a jacket and don't drink cold things when you're walking around outside in the cold because it's gonna get you sick. That's such a Ukrainian cultural idea. The jokes about the way they feed you is just so true of Ukrainian people. There is a scene where he's meeting up with someone from an organization that he wants to work for, and he's meeting with this woman for the first time, and she offers him some food that they have in their fridge. She says, "Do you want anything? We have cabbage rolls," which is a Ukrainian delicacy, and he says, "No thank you, I am all fine, I just ate." So without pausing, she pulls the cabbage rolls out of the fridge and begins microwaving them for him. You will never go hungry in Ukraine. Also, the friendliness of the locals. He strikes up conversations with local Ukrainians, and at first he's very nervous because his Ukrainian isn't very good, but the second these people find out he's a American, they are very intrigued by foreigners. They ask so many questions and they invite him places immediately. The willingness that the Ukrainian people have to make friends, especially foreigner friends, it's just such a good example of everything that you can expect coming to Ukraine as an English speaker, because everyone just has questions for you and wants to know more and get to know you. It's just so precious. I am so glad this book exists, and I rated this one 5 out of 5 stars. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Please let me know down below what your favorite book you read this month was. I have very ambitious plans for this next month, so be on the lookout for another reading wrap up from me soon. Thank you so much again to Katie Van Brunt for sending me your book for review. If you want to follow me on my Instagram, it is right here, and if you want to follow me on my TikTok, that is right here. I will see you all in a few days for another video, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye guys.